The moment started like any other ordinary morning. The sun had barely risen, painting the suburban street in soft gold, and I was sipping my coffee on the porch, listening to the quiet hum of the neighborhood waking up. Birds chirped, leaves rustled in the wind, and everything seemed normal. But normal, I've learned, is just a fragile illusion. I had just turned the page of my newspaper when I noticed a shadow lurking near the edge of my fence. At first, I thought it was a neighbor, maybe someone taking a morning walk. But then my heart sank. He was holding something in his hand, and it wasn't a phone or a newspaper or even a tool. My blood ran cold as I saw the glint of metal. He had a gun, pointed directly over my fence, right into my yard. Time seemed to slow. I froze, my coffee trembling in my hand. Fear hit me like a freight train. Who was this man? What did he want? I'd never seen him before. He didn't even flinch when he saw me noticing him. His eyes were cold, calculating, and something about the way he stood there made it clear he wasn't bluffing. I felt my chest tighten. My mind raced. Could I call 911? Should I confront him or just hide? My instincts screamed at me, but nothing seemed fast enough. My family was inside. My wife, my kids, they had no idea that danger was just beyond the fence. And for a terrifying moment, I thought, this is how it ends. Someone could just walk into our lives, take everything, and I'd be powerless to stop it. Then a sound, soft but deliberate. My ram, Thunder, had been lying in the yard, chewing on a branch, blissfully unaware of human threats. But he knew something was wrong. His ears twitched, his muscles tensed. I could see it in his eyes. The moment he perceived danger, his instincts kicked in. I whispered his name, almost desperately, as if just calling him would keep us safe. And in that split second, my fear mixed with awe. Thunder lowered his head, pawed the ground, and I could feel the raw energy radiating from him. My heart pounded in sync with his. The man didn't notice the shift. He was too focused on me, on whatever irrational plan he had conjured in his mind. And then, the impossible happened. Thunder charged, not recklessly, not blindly, but with purpose. My ram's sheer power and speed were terrifying. He launched himself over the low part of the fence, catching the man completely off guard. There was a scream, a stumble, and the gun clattered to the ground. My hands shook as I realized what had just happened. My ram, loyal, fierce, and impossible to ignore, had defended our home in a way that no human could. The man scrambled, trying to regain his balance, but the look on Thunder's eyes stopped him. Pure, unyielding authority. It was over almost as quickly as it began, but the impact stayed. My mind raced with questions, adrenaline, and disbelief. Who was this man? Why did he think he could threaten me? And how did I ever get so lucky to have a protector like Thunder? As I knelt beside him afterward, brushing the dust off his massive horns, I felt a wave of pride and relief. There's a strange clarity that comes after a brush with danger. You see life for what it really is. You realize how quickly everything can change, and how courage, loyalty, and instinct can turn the tide in a single heartbeat. I glanced at the fallen gun, still gleaming in the morning sun, and I knew something had shifted. This wasn't just about fences or property lines or some petty conflict. This was about survival, about standing your ground, about the unexpected heroes that show up when you need them most. And deep down, I felt it. The story wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The adrenaline faded, leaving me with a quiet, lingering tension. The street returned to its morning calm, but my eyes kept scanning every corner, every shadow. Because now I knew the truth. Some people underestimate the quiet strength of others. Some people underestimate what loyalty and instinct can do. And some people learn the hard way that crossing the wrong fence can change their life forever. I didn't have time to catch my breath before the reality of what had just happened sank in. My hands were still trembling, my heart hammering like a drum in a war march. The man who had pointed a gun over my fence was sprawled on the ground, his chest heaving, eyes wide with disbelief. He had no idea what had just hit him, literally. I should have felt triumph, maybe even satisfaction, but instead I felt something heavier. Fear, because moments like these are never clean. They leave a residue, a mark on your mind, a question that won't go away. Why me? Why now? I knelt down beside Thunder, brushing a hand over his coarse fur, and whispered, "Good boy, good boy." He nudged me gently as if to say, "Don't worry, I've got this." His loyalty was unshakable. Unlike humans, he didn't judge, didn't hesitate, didn't second guess. He simply acted. And right now, his action had saved my family, my home, maybe even my life. The man groaned and slowly tried to pull himself up, but Thunder's massive form blocked his path. I stepped forward, feeling a strange mixture of authority and caution. "Stay down," I said firmly, my voice shaking just enough to reveal my adrenaline, just enough to make him think twice. He froze. For the first time, I saw a flicker of fear in his eyes. Not the fear of a random homeowner, no, this was something deeper. The fear of someone or something he had underestimated. The fear of a consequence he hadn't anticipated. I glanced around my yard, the place that had always been my sanctuary, and realized how fragile it could feel in moments like this. Everything I had built, everything I loved, was at the mercy of a stranger's choices. And for a terrifying instant, I felt powerless. But then, slowly, a quiet determination settled over me. This wasn't just about a fence anymore. This wasn't just about a trespasser or a moment of shock. This was about standing up, about claiming your space, your dignity, your life. I straightened, meeting his gaze head-on. "You don't get to do that," I said. My voice was steady now, sharper, carrying the weight of every person and every life I was responsible for. Not to me, not to my family, not to this home. The man tried to speak, stammering excuses that sounded hollow even to him. I didn't want to hear them. I didn't need to. The lesson had already been taught. Thunder had made sure of that. And then it hit me. The law, the rules, the neighbors, none of it mattered in the split second when survival was on the line. Sometimes, the universe hands you moments where instinct and courage matter more than contracts, permits, or polite introductions. Sometimes, you find your strength in the unlikeliest of allies. I thought about my wife and kids inside, completely unaware of the chaos just beyond the window. My stomach tightened as I imagined their fear if they had witnessed this. It reminded me why I had worked so hard to create a safe home, a place of love and security. And yet, even in the safest place, life can surprise you, sometimes with terror, sometimes with a hero you never expected. I took a cautious step toward the man, and Thunder mirrored my movement, moving between us like a guardian. Every muscle in his body radiated strength, but it wasn't aggression, it was protection. He was the embodiment of loyalty and courage, a living shield. I had never felt so grateful, so relieved, and so unsettled all at once. The man finally pushed himself fully upright, brushing dirt from his clothes, and I could see the realization dawning on him. This wasn't just a home. This wasn't just a yard. This wasn't just a ram. This was a warning. Never underestimate the quiet strength of someone who refuses to be intimidated. I held my ground, my hands slightly raised, not in surrender but in controlled authority. "Leave," I said, my tone final. "Go and don't come back." He hesitated, glancing at Thunder, then at me, then back at the gun lying uselessly in the dirt. For a moment, it seemed like he might challenge us again, that he might think he could still turn this around. But something in the way Thunder stood, the way his eyes locked on the man, the raw power contained in that calm, deliberate posture, it was enough. He turned and walked away, muttering words that didn't matter, leaving the morning silence behind. I sank to the ground, the adrenaline fatting and leaving exhaustion in its wake. My hands still shook, my mind replaying every second, every choice, every heartbeat. I realized then that life is fragile, but courage can be found in the most unexpected forms. In my case, it wore horns and moved faster than any human thought. I stayed there for a long while, just breathing, just looking at the yard, just appreciating the quiet heroism of an animal who didn't ask for thanks. Sometimes, I thought, the strongest defenders aren't the ones with badges or authority, they're the ones who act when no one else will. And as I rose to go back inside, I caught sight of the fence, the space that had nearly been violated, and I felt a deep, personal truth settle in my chest. Sometimes the boundaries we protect aren't just physical. They're emotional, spiritual, moral. They define who we are, what we value, and what we refuse to let anyone take from us. I walked back to the house, the morning sun now higher in the sky, glinting off the leaves, the grass, and the horns of my ram, my protector, my friend. Something had changed in the neighborhood that day. Maybe people didn't know it yet. Maybe they never would. But I knew. And for the first time that morning, I allowed myself a small, quiet smile. We had survived. And sometimes, survival itself is the beginning of a story worth telling. The day didn't return to normal. Not really. Even after the man had fled, a lingering unease clung to the air. Every rustle of leaves, every distant bark, every passing car made me jump. My hands itched to grab the phone, to call someone, police, neighbors, anyone, but part of me knew the truth. The police might arrive too late. Neighbors might whisper behind fences. In moments like this, you learn quickly who can actually protect you and who only pretends to. I walked into the house, still shaken, and saw my family. My wife, unaware, was setting the breakfast table. My kids played quietly in the corner, their laughter echoing like it belonged to a different world, a world untouched by fear. I forced a smile, pretending the adrenaline wasn't still pounding through my veins. But the truth settled heavy in my chest. Our world had shifted. And once something like that happens, you can't unsee it. You can't unfeel it. I glanced at Thunder, who had returned to his favorite corner in the yard. His eyes followed me, calm and steady. I realized then something profound. The man who had threatened me hadn't just crossed a fence. He had underestimated the bond between loyalty and courage. And Thunder wasn't just a ram, he was the living embodiment of that bond. Later that morning, I found myself packing the yard, replaying the scene over and over. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the glint of the gun, the sharpness in that stranger's gaze, the raw force of Thunder as he lunged. My mind kept asking, why now, why us? And then, like a punch to the gut, the reality hit me. This wasn't random. Not entirely. Our neighborhood had always had its share of petty disputes, fence wars, HOA squabbles, and underhanded tactics. But this was different. Someone had come at me deliberately, testing boundaries, testing courage, testing consequences. And they hadn't anticipated the strength waiting on the other side. I called the police eventually, describing the man, the gun, the encounter. They listened politely, asked questions, scribbled notes. But there was something in their tone, a polite detachment, a subtle disbelief, that reminded me of a harsh truth. Not everyone understands danger until it lands in their lap. Not everyone respects instinct until it speaks louder than words. The afternoon brought a false sense of calm. I tried to resume my usual routine, mowing the lawn, checking the mailbox, greeting neighbors. But the tension never fully left. Every glance over my shoulder, every shadow on the street, reminded me that this neighborhood, so carefully curated with manicured lawns and smiling facades, was a place of hidden threats. And some threats didn't knock politely. By evening, I started hearing whispers. The HOA, always eager to insert itself into conflicts, began circulating rumors. "Did you hear about the man at the fence?" they asked in hushed tones at neighborhood meetings. "They say he had a gun," and then the subtle smirks, the sideways glances. People didn't ask how I or my family were doing, they speculated, they judged. Their curiosity felt invasive, their fascination disturbing. I realized something else. Danger isn't always the moment, it's immediate. Sometimes, danger lingers in gossip, in judgment, in the calculated eyes of people who think they understand a story they only glimpse. And sometimes, the real challenge isn't surviving the threat, it's surviving the aftermath. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about what had happened, about the man, about Thunder, about the line that had been crossed. I remembered my father's words from years ago, courage isn't loud. It isn't about guns or yelling. It's about standing when no one expects you to. And I realized, finally, that I hadn't just survived. I had acted. I had made a choice. And choices have consequences, both for those who act and those who underestimate them. I decided to take action, not in anger, not in revenge, but in preparation. I reinforced the fences, checked locks, reviewed safety measures, and most importantly, strengthened the bond with Thunder. Every time I looked at him, I remembered the raw, unfiltered instinct that had saved us. He didn't ask for credit. He didn't care about fear or rumors. He acted when it mattered most. Days passed. The neighborhood resumed its false calm, but I could sense subtle shifts. Neighbors began to respect the line we had drawn, not because of threats or weapons, but because courage and loyalty had spoken. The man who had pulled the gun never returned, and though the relief was real, it carried a bitter edge. We had survived, but survival always carries a price. There's a quiet, lasting vigilance that comes with knowing just how close danger can be. One afternoon, I walked the yard with Thunder, feeling the warm sun on my face. I thought about the lessons hidden in fear, in loyalty, in instinct. Sometimes, life tests you in ways that no one can predict. Sometimes, it hands you a protector who doesn't speak, but whose actions shout louder than words ever could. And sometimes, the boundaries you defend aren't just about property, they're about dignity, trust, and the invisible lines that define who you are. I realized something else, quietly, almost painfully. Heroism often arrives in unexpected forms. The ram that had lunged across my fence had become more than an animal. He was a symbol, a guardian, a reminder that courage doesn't always come in human form. And in that realization, I felt a sense of gratitude I couldn't quite articulate. That night, as I watched Thunder settle in the corner of the yard, I understood the truth of our lives in this neighborhood. Danger can come from anywhere. Judgment can follow in its wake. And yet, in the quiet, in the instincts of those who truly care, there is power. There is protection. There is hope. And I knew, deep down, that this was only the beginning. The world had tested us, and we had passed. But the story wasn't finished. There were still lessons to be learned, threats to be understood, and boundaries to defend. And with Thunder by my side, I felt ready for whatever came next. The next morning, I realized the battle hadn't ended at the fence. It had merely shifted into a new, subtler battlefield, one of whispers, glances, and carefully worded conversations. The HOA had taken notice of the incident, not because they cared about our safety, but because in their eyes, any disruption to their carefully curated suburban order was worth their attention. I stepped outside, coffee in hand, and noticed a small group of neighbors gathered across the street. Their eyes flicked toward me, their faces carefully neutral, but their expressions betrayed curiosity, judgment, and maybe a touch of fear. I understood immediately, rumors spread faster than truth in this neighborhood. And truth was messy. Truth involved a ram charging, a man with a gun, and a family surviving a moment no one wanted to imagine. I could feel it in the air, the tension. People were watching, evaluating, waiting for a misstep. And for the first time, I understood the silent warfare that exists in these pristine streets. Everyone wants to appear perfect. Everyone wants to control the narrative. But when reality intrudes, even the polished facades crack. The HOA president, a woman with sharp eyes and an even sharper tongue, appeared at the end of the driveway. She was flanked by two board members, clipboards in hand, a studied expression of concern painted on her face. But it was a performance, a carefully rehearsed act. "Good morning," she began, her voice measured, almost sweet. "We've heard about the incident at your property. We just want to ensure that everything is handled appropriately, for the safety of the community, of course." I met her gaze calmly. "Everything is handled," I said. "We took the necessary precautions. The man left, no one was harmed, and my property is secure." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Of course," she said, "but it's our duty to make sure these matters are reported properly. We wouldn't want anything to escalate further, would we?" I felt a twinge of irritation. The arrogance, the performative concern, it was infuriating. But I knew better than to react impulsively. The HOA thrived on conflict, on manipulation, on turning minor events into stories that served their authority. My job wasn't to escalate. My job was to survive and to protect what mattered most. As they walked away, murmuring among themselves, I realized something crucial. The threat wasn't just physical anymore. It had entered the social sphere, where gossip and speculation could wound as sharply as any weapon. And in this neighborhood, perception was everything. I spent the rest of the morning reinforcing the yard, double-checking locks, and ensuring Thunder had a clear vantage point of the street. Every moment, every sound, every passerby became a measure of security. The ram, calm but alert, had become more than a pet. He was a sentinel, a symbol of the line that would not be crossed. By afternoon, the tension had grown thicker. A neighbor I had always thought friendly approached, ostensibly to ask about the incident. But the questions were loaded, the tones subtly accusatory. "Is it true he had a gun?" they asked. "You hurt him, did you?" I shook my head. "We didn't need to, he left, that's all that matters." They nodded slowly, but I could see the wheels turning in their head, the subtle calculations of gossip and judgment. I realized then that survival isn't always about confrontation. Sometimes, it's about navigating the delicate dance of perception, proving strength without unnecessary conflict, and maintaining dignity when everyone else is speculating. That evening, the neighborhood seemed quiet, almost peaceful. But I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only temporary. Threats don't always announce themselves with guns and shouting. Some threats linger, patient, hidden in plain sight, in the polished smiles and friendly nods of people who think they can manipulate reality. I sat on the porch, watching the sun dip behind the trees, thunder resting at my feet. I reflected on what had happened, not just the man with the gun, but the web of subtle pressures that came afterward. There's a quiet lesson in these moments. Courage isn't always loud. Sometimes, courage is standing firm while the world whispers doubt, judgment, and fear in your ears. And yet I couldn't ignore a creeping unease. My senses had been sharpened by the first encounter. Every noise, every shadow, every unexpected movement made me tense. I was ready for another confrontation, though I didn't know what form it would take. The HOA, neighbors, the unseen eyes watching from behind curtains, danger could emerge from any direction. The night deepened, and I realized that in the struggle to protect home and family, the real battles are often invisible. They exist in perception, in authority, in control. And I understood something essential. To survive in this world, to protect what you love, you must master not only action but also restraint. You must know when to act, when to observe, and when to let instinct guide you. I leaned back, letting the cool night air wash over me, and felt thunder shift slightly at my feet, a reassuring presence. We had faced the immediate threat together, we had survived. But the fight for peace, for dignity, for control over our lives had just begun. And in that quiet moment, I made a silent vow. No matter the whispers, no matter the judgment, no matter the invisible pressures of this neighborhood, I would protect my family, my home, and the line that would never be crossed. Because sometimes, the fiercest battles aren't fought with weapons. Sometimes, they're fought with presence, with courage, and with the quiet, unwavering loyalty of those who refuse to back down. And as I looked out over the street, bathed in the soft glow of the streetlights, I knew this. The neighborhood might watch, it might speculate, but we were ready. The line had been drawn, and nothing would cross it again. The next morning, the air felt heavier than usual. There was a stillness in the neighborhood, as if the streets themselves were holding their breath, waiting for something to break. I could feel it, the subtle gaze of neighbors peeking from behind curtains, the cautious steps of people passing by, pretending nothing had happened. But nothing about yesterday was ordinary. Nothing about yesterday would ever feel ordinary again. I stepped outside to check the yard and immediately sensed it. The HOA had arrived, not with smiles, not with polite inquiries, but with authority, with presence, with an air that screamed control. The president, clipboard in hand, was accompanied by 2 more board members and a man I didn't recognize, sharply dressed, with a badge clipped to his belt. My stomach tightened. Great, I thought. They've brought someone official, or at least someone trying to look official. "Good morning," the HOA president said, her tone sweet but edged with steel. "We wanted to follow up on yesterday's incident, for the safety of the neighborhood, of course." I kept my voice calm, neutral, but every word carried a weight they couldn't touch. "Everything is handled, no one was harmed, and our home is secure." She smiled, that thin, practiced smile that never reached her eyes. "We understand," she said, "but we have received complaints from neighbors, and there are questions about property lines, potential threats," and her eyes flicked to the man with the badge. "The security protocols." I felt my chest tighten. Property lines, threats, security protocols. Suddenly, the focus shifted from the man with the gun to me, as if I were on trial for defending myself, as if survival had become a liability. And in that moment, I realized the real danger wasn't just physical. It was political, social, emotional. It was the HOA, a force that thrived on control, manipulation, and intimidation. I defended my family, I said evenly. No one crossed our boundaries and no one was hurt, that's the truth. The man with the badge stepped forward, clearing his throat. We're here to mediate. There are complaints from other residents that your actions escalated the situation. We need to review everything, fences, threats, and animals on the property. I froze. Animals. Thunder shifted behind me, his massive frame moving protectively, his eyes sharp and unyielding. The ram had saved our lives, and now his very existence was being questioned as if instinct, courage, and loyalty were crimes. I took a deep breath, centering myself. Thunder did what any guardian would do. He protected my family. That's all. And anyone who has a problem with that is welcome to leave, because my home, my family, and my property are not up for debate. The HOA president's smile faltered ever so slightly. She glanced at the others, exchanged a quick whispered word, and then turned back to me. We understand your perspective, she said, but there was a sharp edge now, something almost threatening. But we must ensure that the community feels safe. There will be a meeting to review the situation, and we expect full cooperation. I nodded slowly, carefully, cooperation. A polite word masking scrutiny, judgment, and control. I knew the drill. The HOA thrived on appearances. They didn't care about truth. They cared about power, about who bowed, about who could be manipulated. And for the first time, I understood that defending my family wasn't just about fending off strangers. It was about standing up to the subtle, relentless force of authority itself. That evening, I watched the neighborhood with a new vigilance. Every glance, every whisper, every subtle movement carried weight. People were already speculating, judging, questioning, calculating. But I was ready. I had thunder. I had truth. And I had a resolve that no rumor, no clipped badge, no clipboard could shake. Days passed and the tension grew. The HOA organized their meeting, and I received a formal notice demanding my presence, a detailed account of the incident, and even photographs of the yard and fence. Their language was careful, precise, almost clinical, but the threat beneath it was unmistakable: comply or face consequences. I prepared. I reviewed every moment, every detail, every decision. I documented everything: the man with the gun, the way Thunder had reacted, the timeline, the neighbors' statements. I knew the HOA would try to twist the story, to manipulate perception, to cast me as the instigator. But I also knew that truth, documented and unflinching, carried its own power. The day of the meeting arrived. I walked into the HOA office, Thunder waiting outside, a silent sentinel. Inside, the room was tense, charged with unspoken judgments. The president smiled, welcoming me, but it felt hollow, rehearsed. Board members sat stiffly, clipboards ready, and the man with the badge observed silently. I could feel their eyes on me, measuring, assessing, weighing my words, my posture, my very presence. When it was my turn to speak, I took a deep breath and began. I recounted the incident exactly as it had happened: the shadow at the fence, the gun, the charge, Thunder's intervention, the man's retreat. I spoke calmly, with measured pauses, allowing every detail to land. Every word carried the weight of truth, every pause emphasized courage and instinct, every sentence highlighted the loyalty that had saved lives. There were murmurs, questions, and subtle attempts to twist the narrative. But you could have. Was there provocation? Are you certain? I remained steadfast. I refused to bend to insinuations or half-truths. My family's safety wasn't up for debate. My decisions weren't negotiable. By the time I finished, there was silence. The room was thick with tension, but also with recognition. They couldn't argue with courage. They couldn't deny instinct. And while the HOA would try to preserve their authority, the truth had been laid bare. My family had been defended, my property had been protected, and no intimidation, official or otherwise, would sway that reality. As I left the room, I felt a sense of quiet victory. Not loud, not boastful, not dramatic, but powerful in its certainty. Sometimes survival isn't just about facing the obvious threats. Sometimes it's about facing the hidden ones, the social pressures, the subtle manipulations, the people who think they can dictate your life. And sometimes the strongest victories are those you don't shout about. They are the ones that leave you standing, unbroken, and ready for whatever comes next. Outside, thunder nudged my hand gently. I smiled, a mix of relief, pride, and gratitude. He had faced danger without hesitation, without fear, without expectation. And together, we had faced the unseen forces that sought to control, intimidate, and judge. That night, I reflected on the lessons hidden in the struggle. Courage comes in many forms. Loyalty doesn't ask for recognition. And sometimes, the fiercest battles are fought not with weapons, but with presence, truth, and unwavering resolve. I looked out over the quiet streets of the neighborhood, the shadows stretching long and deliberate under the streetlights. The HOA may watch, the neighbors may whisper, and the world may test you in ways you never expect. But as long as you have truth, courage, and allies who act when it matters most, no force, no matter how calculated, can take away what is rightfully yours. The days after the HOA meeting were the longest I've ever experienced. There's a peculiar kind of pressure that comes after people think they have you cornered, when whispers and sideways glances carry more weight than any weapon ever could. I could feel it in the air every time I stepped outside. The judgment, the curiosity, the silent speculation of neighbors who thought they understood my life from scraps of information and half-truths. It wasn't just gossip. There were subtle threats now, thinly veiled in casual conversation. "I hope everything's settled with that ram of yours," a neighbor would say, smiling faintly, a hint of malice behind their words. "You never know what might happen in these parts." Every statement, every glance, felt like an attempt to unbalance me, to poke at the fear that still lingered from that morning at the fence. But I wasn't about to let them see my fear. Not now, not ever. I had survived the gun, survived the HOA, and survived the scrutiny of every judgmental eye in the neighborhood. And I had Thunder. He had become more than a guardian. He had become a symbol of our resilience, of our refusal to bow to intimidation. Every time he nudged my hand or stomped his hooves near a stranger's approach, I felt a quiet reassurance that whatever came next, we would face it together. Then came the late afternoon. I was in the yard, checking the fences one more time when I noticed movement at the edge of the property, a shadow slipping through the tall hedges that lined the boundary. My pulse quickened immediately. I instinctively scanned for the man with the gun, but it wasn't him. It was someone new, someone younger, someone who carried a different kind of menace, confidence masked as politeness. They stopped just short of the fence, hands raised in mock surrender. "I just wanted to talk," they said, voice smooth, rehearsed. But I could see the intent behind their eyes, testing boundaries, probing for weakness, seeing if yesterday had shaken my control. Thunder's ears twitched, muscles coiled like a spring ready to snap. I placed my hand on his massive head, feeling the tension radiate through his body. "Not today," I muttered, almost to myself, almost as a prayer. And in that moment, I realized something I hadn't fully acknowledged before. Survival isn't just about protecting what you love. It's about recognizing danger, anticipating it, and meeting it with resolve before it can strike. The young man stepped closer, ignoring Thunder's warning stance, ignoring my voice. "You think you're so clever," he said, lips curling slightly, "protecting your little corner of the world. But everyone has limits. Everyone has a line." His tone was calm, almost patronizing, but the underlying threat was clear. He intended to find mine. I didn't flinch, I didn't raise my voice. I simply stepped forward, standing tall, letting Thunder move alongside me, a living shield that no human calculation could overpower. "You don't know me," I said evenly. "You don't know this family. You don't know what we will protect or how far we will go to protect it." The tension hung in the air like thick fog. I could feel the subtle sway of power, the silent dance of threat and caution. One wrong step, one miscalculation, and this confrontation could escalate in ways neither of us wanted. But I didn't hesitate. I couldn't. My family's safety, my home, and my dignity demanded it. Finally, the young man stepped back, evaluating, calculating, and perhaps realizing that he had underestimated the bond between courage and loyalty. "This isn't over," he said softly, almost a whisper, before disappearing behind the hedges, leaving an echo of threat in his wake. I stood there, heart pounding, watching the spot where he had vanished. The adrenaline slowly ebbed, replaced by a heavy awareness. The neighborhood's quiet, the HOA's subtle manipulation, and the individuals who tested boundaries. They all existed to remind me of one hard truth: peace is never given. It must be defended every day in every way. That night, I reviewed the events in my mind, thinking about the gun, the HOA, the whispers, the young man at the hedge. I realized that courage isn't just a single moment of action. It's a state of readiness, a continuous commitment to stand when others waver. And sometimes, courage comes in unexpected forms, not just human but instinctive, primal, unwavering. Thunder had been that courage. He had been the anchor in a storm of fear and intimidation. I spent hours reinforcing the yard, checking every potential access point, ensuring that my family would be safe from anyone who dared to cross our boundaries again. By the time I finally sat down, exhausted, I knew something else. The real battle wasn't just about property, or fences, or even physical threats. It was about trust, perception, and the quiet understanding that some lines cannot be crossed without consequence. The following days brought subtle shifts. Neighbors approached less boldly, their smiles more cautious, their glances fleeting. The HOA continued to circulate their formal communications, thinly veiled threats hidden in polite language. But I felt a change, a subtle recognition that the family at the corner, protected by courage, loyalty, and a ram who refused to be underestimated, would not bow easily. Every morning, as I stepped onto the porch with Thunder beside me, I felt a quiet resolve. We had survived the gun, the intimidation, the scrutiny, and the whispers. We had survived the unexpected challenges of a neighborhood obsessed with control and appearances. And we had done it together. Sometimes, I thought, survival isn't measured by the battles you fight openly. It's measured by the quiet vigilance, the unspoken readiness, the moral backbone that refuses to yield to fear. And sometimes, the fiercest battles are fought not in the open, but in the shadow of expectation, in the subtle confrontations that test the heart as much as the body. That night, as the streetlights cast long shadows across the yard, I watched Thunder settle in his corner, ears twitching at every sound. I realized something profound. Loyalty isn't just a trait, it's a force. Courage isn't just action, it's a presence. And boundaries, once defended, demand respect, whether others recognize it or not. I leaned back on the porch, reflecting on the journey so far. The man with the gun, the HOA, the whispers, the young man at the hedge, they had all tested me, tried to bend me, tried to challenge the line I had drawn. But the truth was clear. The line was mine and mine alone to defend. And with Thunder at my side, ready to act, ready to protect, I knew we were prepared for whatever or whoever came next. The night was quiet, but the tension remained, a subtle reminder that the world isn't always fair, that threats rarely announce themselves with clarity, and that true courage is measured not just in the moments of immediate danger, but in the days, weeks, and months that follow. And I knew, deep down, that our story was far from over. It started like any other morning, but nothing about that day would ever be ordinary again. The sun was barely cresting the horizon, painting the street in pale gold when I noticed him. The man from the hedge, the young one who had tested our boundaries, was back. Not hiding this time, not careful or subtle. He stepped onto the sidewalk, head held high, eyes scanning the neighborhood as if daring anyone to confront him. My heart tightened. This wasn't curiosity or intimidation anymore. This was a deliberate challenge. He wasn't alone. Subtle movements behind him hinted at allies, shadows slipping between houses, waiting for the signal to strike. The calm, orderly streets of my neighborhood were a stage, and someone had decided it was time to turn it into a battleground. I didn't panic, I didn't retreat. I had spent days preparing, observing, and reinforcing. I had Thunder, I had truth, I had resolve. And sometimes, resolve is the only weapon you truly need. I stepped outside, taking a deep breath, letting the morning air fill my lungs. Thunder's eyes met mine, sharp and unwavering. Every muscle in his body radiated readiness, a living warning to anyone foolish enough to test us. I whispered his name, a quiet affirmation, a connection that required no words. And then I faced them. The young man's lips curled into a smirk. "Thought you could intimidate me with that thing," he said, nodding toward Thunder. "You've got spirit, I'll give you that, but spirit isn't enough. Not here." I didn't flinch. "It's enough to protect my family, that's all it needs to be." My voice was calm, measured, carrying a quiet authority that only truth can give. "Leave, now, and walk away, or you'll regret testing the line you shouldn't have crossed." For a moment, nothing moved. The street seemed to hold its breath. And then, like a ripple in water, the young man's confidence faltered. He glanced at the shadows behind him, the potential allies waiting for a cue, and I saw hesitation. But hesitation doesn't always save you from recklessness. He stepped closer. "You don't get it," he said. "This neighborhood, this place, it's about control, about who can bend who, and you're just a—" The sentence died in his throat as Thunder shifted. The ram's hooves scraped against the ground, the sheer force and presence radiating from him like a warning shot. Thunder's eyes locked on the intruder with a mix of calm precision and raw, untamed strength. It wasn't aggression for the sake of violence. It was defense, loyalty, inevitability. And in that instant, I realized something profound. Courage, like Thunder, is often quiet until provoked. Loyalty, like Thunder, doesn't ask for recognition, it acts when the moment demands it. And boundaries, once drawn and defended, demand respect, even from those foolish enough to challenge them. The young man stumbled backward, not from physical contact, but from the weight of presence. I stepped forward as well, my voice firm, steady, unwavering. "You don't know what you're dealing with. You don't know the family. You don't know what we will protect or how far we will go." He glanced down the street, calculating, evaluating, realizing he had underestimated more than just a ram. He had underestimated resolve, instinct, and the unshakable bond between family and protector. And then, almost in slow motion, the tension broke. Thunder charged, not blindly, not recklessly, but with precision. The young man scrambled, tripping over the uneven curb, his allies hesitating as the reality of the situation settled in. Fear replaced arrogance. Panic replaced calculation. I stepped forward, ensuring my family stayed safely inside the house, my hands raised not in surrender but in measured authority. "Leave," I said, my voice carrying the weight of every boundary, every line, every value we had defended. "Now, and don't ever come back." The young man scrambled to his feet, eyes wide with disbelief. He looked at Thunder, at me, at the street itself, and for the first time I saw real understanding, the understanding that some things cannot be bent, cannot be intimidated, and cannot be broken. With a final glance, he turned and fled, dragging his allies with him, leaving the street quiet once more. I exhaled, the adrenaline crashing through my system. I knelt beside Thunder, running my hands over his fur, feeling the warmth, the strength, the presence that had once again protected everything I held dear. He nudged my hand gently, as if reminding me that courage is often silent until it needs to roar. The neighborhood seemed to recover slowly, almost reluctantly. Whispers persisted, of course, rumors, gossip, speculation, but there was a new respect now, subtle but unmistakable. People had seen, or at least sensed, that some lines cannot be crossed without consequence. And while the HOA would continue their meetings, their reports, their thinly veiled threats, I knew one truth. No authority, no rumor, no intimidation could diminish the reality of what had been defended that day. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees, I walked the yard with Thunder by my side. The quiet of the neighborhood felt different now, not safe perhaps, but honest. We had faced threat after threat, challenge after challenge, and emerged unbroken. The fear had been real, the danger undeniable, but the courage, loyalty, and determination had prevailed. I realized then a truth that would stay with me forever. Heroism isn't always loud. It doesn't always come with recognition, applause, or medals. Sometimes, heroism shows up quietly in the instinct to protect, the courage to act, and the loyalty that refuses to bend to intimidation. And sometimes, heroism wears horns and stands as a living testament to the strength of resolve. That night, I reflected on everything that had happened, The man with the gun, the HOA, the whispers, the threats, the young man testing boundaries. I understood that true courage isn't measured by the absence of fear, but by the choice to act in spite of it. And loyalty isn't measured by words, but by the presence that shows up when it matters most. As I watched Thunder settle into his favorite spot in the yard, eyes alert even in the dark, I felt a deep sense of gratitude and peace. The battle had been won, not just against strangers, not just against the intimidation of the HOA, but against the quiet doubts that sometimes creep into the heart. We had survived. We had stood our ground. And we had proven in the most undeniable way that some lines are sacred and some guardians are unstoppable. The morning after the confrontation felt surreal. The sun rose over the neighborhood, spilling golden light across the streets. The lawns, the fences, everything that had once seemed ordinary now carried the weight of memory. The air was quieter, the whispers subdued, and for the first time in days, I felt a moment of calm. But calm doesn't arrive without vigilance, and I knew better than to let my guard down completely. I stepped outside, Thunder at my side, and surveyed the yard. Every blade of grass, every corner, every shadow seemed familiar now, yet charged with a new meaning. This was our space, our home, and no matter who tried to disrupt it, we had proven that courage, loyalty, and resolve would defend it, without compromise. Neighbors were starting to look at us differently. The sideways glances carried a subtle respect now, a recognition that what had happened was not an exaggeration, not a rumor, not a story they could twist to their advantage. Some nodded politely as they passed, while others avoided eye contact entirely, as if acknowledging the invisible force that had protected our home. And through it all, Thunder remained vigilant, ears twitching, muscles coiled, yet calm in the presence of his family. The HOA, predictably, attempted one last formal intervention. Notices, meetings, and polite inquiries continued to arrive. But I had learned the rules of engagement, the delicate dance between compliance and defiance, and the art of standing firm without unnecessary escalation. I responded calmly, measuredly, documenting every interaction, ensuring that truth was preserved. In the end, they could threaten, lecture, and speculate, but they could not touch the reality that had unfolded, the courage that had been displayed, and the bond that had been proven unbreakable. As the day progressed, I found moments of reflection, quiet pockets of time where the adrenaline ebbed and allowed clarity to seep in. I thought about everything: the man with the gun, the young provocateurs, the whispers, the subtle threats, the judgmental eyes of the neighborhood. I thought about the fear, the tension, and the choices I had made in moments that demanded clarity and courage. And through it all, I realized something profound. Protection is not just an action. It is a responsibility, a moral code, a promise that you make with yourself and those you love. Thunder nudged my hand, breaking my reverie, and I smiled. The ram had been more than a protector, he had been a teacher. He had shown me what loyalty looks like when it cannot be bargained with, what courage looks like when fear threatens to dominate, and what presence looks like when silence and patience combine with instinctive action. Sometimes, the greatest lessons arrive in forms you never expect. A ram charging across a fence, an instinct that speaks louder than words, a silent affirmation that some lines cannot be crossed. Later that evening, I walked the yard again, reflecting on the journey we had endured. The neighborhood streets glowed softly under the lamplight, shadows stretching long and deliberate. The air carried the quiet hum of distant traffic, the rustle of leaves, the occasional bark of a dog, mundane details now infused with significance. We had survived, yes. But more than that, we had stood our ground, defended our home, and emerged stronger, wiser, and more connected than ever. The experience left me with a moral that didn't need preaching, didn't need banners or applause. I had learned that courage often manifests in quiet moments, not just in grand gestures. Loyalty is not measured by words, but by presence, by action, by unwavering commitment in the face of threats both obvious and hidden. And the boundaries you draw, whether physical, emotional, or moral, are worth defending, no matter how subtle or powerful the opposition may seem. That night, as I watched Thunder settle into his favorite corner, eyes alert even in the dark, I felt a sense of peace tempered by awareness. The world is unpredictable. Danger can emerge from the shadows or from smiling faces. Rumors can sting, authority can intimidate, and whispers can wound. But courage, truth, and loyalty, those forces are enduring. They don't fade with time, they don't bend to pressure, and they don't falter in the presence of fear. I realized, finally, that the story wasn't just about the gun, the threats, or the HOA. It was about what it means to stand firm, to protect what matters, and to honor the bonds that define family, home, and moral integrity. It was about the line that cannot be crossed, the presence that refuses to be shaken, and the courage that emerges when instinct, preparation, and love collide. And in the quiet of that night, as the stars glimmered overhead and the neighborhood lay in peaceful slumber, I felt a deep sense of gratitude for survival, for loyalty, for courage, and for the lessons hidden in moments of chaos. Thunder shifted beside me, nudging my hand gently, and I whispered a quiet acknowledgement. We did it, together. The streets may eventually forget the events, the whispers may fade, and the HOA may resume their rituals of control. But the truth remains unshakable. We had faced danger, we had defended our home, and we had emerged stronger, united, and unbroken. And that, I realized, is the quiet power of standing your ground. Not with aggression, not with malice, but with courage, loyalty, and the unwavering presence of those who refuse to back down. As I finally turned to head inside, the night wrapped around us like a protective cloak. The journey had tested every fiber of our being, fear, loyalty, courage, and resilience, but in the end, it had forged something stronger than any threat could ever diminish. We were home, and some lines, once drawn and defended, remain sacred forever. Every HOA has a story on HOA headaches. You'll hear the ones they tried to bury. Subscribe today.